He mocked me for quitting, but my goodbye letter made him turn pale. Jenna Carter had always been the kind of employee who preferred to stay under the radar, quiet, diligent, and relentlessly committed to her work. At Greenfield Marketing Agency, nestled in the heart of a bustling city, Jenna had built a reputation as dependable but invisible. She poured herself into every project, often staying late to perfect details no one noticed. Yet, despite her dedication, the recognition she longed for never came. Instead, she faced Ethan Foster, the agency's charismatic yet domineering manager, whose sharp tongue and quick wit masked a need for control that he exercised mercilessly. Ethan had made it his personal mission to belittle Jenna, not just in private, but in front of their entire team. Jenna tried to keep her chin up, telling herself her work would someday speak for itself. But day after day, the subtle jabs evolved into brazen public jeers. At meetings, Ethan interrupted her presentations with sarcastic remarks. What should have been constructive feedback quickly turned into humiliating put-downs. "Nice try, Jenna," he'd sneer, "but let's leave the big ideas for the professionals." Laughter would ripple across the room, faces turning toward her with a mix of awkwardness and amusement, reinforcing the weight of his dismissal. Jenna's stomach churned as her voice, once steady, now caught on the brink of trembling when she tried to respond. The office, a space that should have been her platform for growth, felt more like a cage. Her coworkers' eyes often flicked away, unwilling or afraid to step in, leaving Jenna isolated with the sting of shame. She was acutely aware of the gap between who she was and what Ethan made her feel. Small, overlooked, and incapable. The woman who had once dreamed of leading campaigns and sparking change now struggled to even bring her ideas to the table. Behind closed doors, Jenna would replay scenes in her mind, her chest tightening with frustration and hurt. She knew she deserved better, but uncertainty gnawed at her. Was she imagining the insults? Was she really as inadequate as Ethan insisted? The doubt was a thief, slowly stealing her confidence. Then came the day that shattered what little composure Jenna had left. After months of painstaking work on a campaign that she was told could be a game-changer for the agency, Jenna was scheduled to present her vision to the entire team. She rehearsed endlessly, hoping this time would be different, that Ethan would see her effort and maybe, just maybe, acknowledge her worth. But as she stood before the room, clicking through slides filled with creative concepts, Ethan's smirk grew wider. The moment she paused to catch her breath, he interjected with biting sarcasm, mocking her ideas as naive and out of touch with the market. His voice echoed, "Is this a joke, Jenna? Maybe you should stick to what you're really good at, making coffee." Laughter erupted, and Jenna's cheeks flushed bright red, moisture pricking at her eyes. Her hands shook as she struggled to maintain control, the room shrinking around her in a suffocating wave of humiliation. Every head was turned, every eye fixed on her with the coldness of judgment. She wanted to disappear, to rewind time and find the courage she didn't have in that moment. The presentation dissolved into whispers and snickers, and as Jenna closed her folder, heart pounding, the realization settled like a stone. This was her breaking point. The campaign she had poured her soul into was dismissed with cruelty, and the person responsible was sitting right at the center, wearing a smug grin that said she was nothing more than a punchline. Invisible until then, the air crackled with unbearable tension, and Jenna knew something had to change before she lost herself entirely. The sting of that day's humiliation clung to Jenna like a second skin, and the hours that followed felt heavier than the moment itself. When the last of her colleagues filed out of the conference room, their whispered remarks fading into the hum of office chatter, Jenna remained at her desk, numb and overwhelmed by a torrent of emotions she couldn't unravel. The laughter replayed relentlessly in her mind, but it wasn't just the mockery. It was the feeling of invisibility, the cold dismissal that no one intervened, no one stood by her side. It was as if her presence, her voice, and her very worth were inconsequential. Ethan's cruelty wasn't new, but the public spectacle pushed a deeper wound into her soul. She felt exposed, raw, as if her confidence had been stripped bare in front of the only people she saw every day. The injustice burned inside her. How could someone so wrong consistently hold so much power? And why had she allowed herself to be diminished for so long? Jenna wrestled silently with despair, a knot tightening in her chest every time she stole a glance at Ethan's smug face across the room. He thrived in his ability to belittle, to command attention by putting others down, as if his dominance depended on their submission. The question that echoed louder than words was, why didn't anyone speak up? Her colleagues exchanged glances, but remained silent, their silence stitching shut the wound Ethan had so carelessly inflicted. Jenna's heart ached with a sense of betrayal, loneliness seeping through the walls she had built to protect herself. She felt smaller than ever, waiting for someone, anyone, to validate her pain, to say that what had happened wasn't right. That afternoon, as she sat alone in the break room, Jenna's hands trembled as she stared at her reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at her seemed fragile, overshadowed by the weight of others' judgment. Memories of late nights and relentless effort filled her mind, juxtaposed against the cruel dismissal she had endured. It was unfair, it was wrong, but the silence was deafening. In this bleak moment, a small voice inside urged her not to give up entirely. "You deserve better," it whispered. The faintest flicker of hope sparked, a stubborn ember refusing to be snuffed out. Maybe this wasn't the end, but a beginning of something she hadn't dared to imagine yet. If there's one lesson Jenna would want others to hear, it's that no one should have to suffer in silence. Words can wound deeply, but sometimes facing the pain head-on is the first step toward reclaiming strength no one can take away. If you've ever felt powerless in the face of unfair treatment, remember, your voice matters even when it feels like the world won't listen. Meanwhile, Ethan reveled in his control, oblivious to the storm his behavior was brewing beneath the surface. He mistook Jenna's quietness for weakness, his arrogance blinding him to the truth that the seeds of change had already been planted. Jenna's resolve began to simmer quietly. Her answer was coming, and when it did, it would shake the very foundations of the office he thought he owned. For now, though, Jenna was left alone with her thoughts, grappling with a painful mix of vulnerability and resilience. The road ahead was uncertain, and the world seemed cold, but within her flickered an unspoken promise. This was not where her story would end. In the days that followed, Jenna tried to shake off the heavy cloud that hung over her. She told herself to keep going, to prove that her work mattered, despite Ethan's sharp words and mockery. But every step forward felt like sinking deeper into quicksand. She submitted reports with meticulous care, stayed overtime to contribute ideas, and avoided eye contact with Ethan whenever possible. Yet the cold treatment persisted, a constant reminder that she was still the office target. The weight of humiliation had settled so deep within her that it was difficult to summon even a flicker of pride. Jenna attempted to confide in a few trusted colleagues, seeking empathy, or at least some sense she was not alone. But their responses were guarded. Some shrugged, awkward silence filling the space. Others gave hesitant reassurances that felt more like polite words than genuine support. The isolation was palpable, and Jenna realized just how lonely it was to be the person everyone seemed to watch fall, but no one helped lift. The small glimmers of hope flickered and faltered. She applied for internal opportunities for advancement, only to hear her proposals either ignored or redirected to others. When she tried to shadow senior team members, her initiatives were brushed aside with little explanation. Jenna questioned if she was overreacting, if maybe she really didn't belong, or worse, if speaking up would only invite more ridicule. The fear of further humiliation clamped down on her like a vice, but the desire to escape was growing stronger every day. Yet amid this bleakness, Jenna found herself slowly building quiet moments of reflection. On her way home, she would watch the city's sun setting behind gleaming skyscrapers, reminding her that not all lights were dim. Sometimes she searched online for stories of people who had endured workplace cruelty and come through stronger. Those stories murmured a silent promise that maybe, just maybe, she could rewrite her narrative. A few late nights, she even scribbled thoughts in a battered journal, sorting through her tangled emotions and yearning for a breakthrough she couldn't quite reach. One evening, Jenna sat before her laptop, preparing a routine project overview when sudden exhaustion washed over her. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, and a thought emerged unbidden. What if she didn't stay silent any longer? What if she spoke honestly about everything? About Ethan's relentless put-downs, the loneliness, the frustration? The idea was terrifying, but the alternative felt far worse, continuing to shrink beneath the shadow of her tormentor. At that moment, Jenna felt both terrified and determined as the room seemed to close around her thoughts. Could she trust herself to be that brave? Could she risk everything on words she wasn't sure would be heard? The question gnawed at her, but beneath it lay an ember of courage that refused to die. The tension of uncertainty stretched taut. Jenna wondered if confronting the pain head-on would finally clear a path of relief, or expose her to further humiliation. The balance between hope and fear was delicate, but somewhere deep inside, she knew time was running out. If she wanted to reclaim her dignity and future, she had to act, and soon. If you've ever felt caught between doubt and the will to stand up, remember, even in the darkest moments, the choice to face your truth can spark a transformation. Jenna's next step would mark a turning point, but until then, the story held its breath in the quiet moments between defeat and hope. The days dragged on, each one heavier than the last, until Jenna found herself teetering on the edge of exhaustion and despair. The situation escalated in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Ethan's public jabs became more frequent and crueler, no longer just masked behind sarcasm, but laced with outright contempt that left Jenna's spirit battered. During a team meeting, when she timidly suggested a minor tweak to a client's proposal, Ethan dismissed her with a sneer. "Maybe you should stick to keeping your head down and leave the high-level thinking to us." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, but nobody challenged his words. Jenna's heart sank further as she felt the sting of isolation cut deeper than ever. Rumors began to circulate, subtle, poisonous whispers questioning Jenna's competence, her professionalism, even her dedication. Some coworkers started avoiding her entirely. The office, once a place she had reluctantly called her second home, now felt like a prison built from whispered accusations and glances that pierced like knives. Jenna arrived each day weighed down by dread, her confidence shattered, her dreams dimming to a flicker. She felt as if she were sinking into a never-ending spiral, one misstep away from being completely erased. Her personal life, too, began to suffer under the strain. Sleepless nights alone in her apartment were haunted by her own doubts and fears. The mirror reflected a woman who was losing herself to the weight of humiliation. How had she descended so far, from hopeful and strong to fragile and scared? The gnawing question lingered. Was there any way out of this dark tunnel, or was she destined to be trapped beneath Ethan's shadow forever? One morning, Jenna stumbled into the kitchen at work, exhausted and defeated. The walls seemed to close in around her when she overheard Ethan's mocking laughter stirring amidst a cluster of colleagues. "She's just not cut out for this," someone whispered, and the words sliced through her like ice. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring the sterile office lights into hazy streaks. Her body felt hollow, her spirit broken in ways she hadn't known possible. It was unmistakably her lowest point. Yet even in that abyss, a tiny flicker of quiet determination began to kindle. Jenna clenched her fists under the sink, her breath shallow but steady. She remembered the dreams she once refused to abandon, the aspirations of a future where she played a leading role in her own story. It wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her sense of self. That evening, after everyone had left, Jenna sat alone at her desk, the office eerily silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Slowly, she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. Words began to flow. Pain, truth, and courage poured out in measured, eloquent sentences. It wasn't a resignation fueled by defeat, but a farewell charged with conviction. She wrote Ethan's toxic reign, the emotional wounds inflicted, and the unyielding spirit that refused to be crushed despite it all. The letter was more than just a goodbye. It was a bold declaration of self-respect and an unshakable refusal to be silenced or diminished any longer. If you've ever felt crushed under the weight of unfair treatment, remember that the darkest moments often precede the brightest breakthroughs. Jenna's story was far from over. In fact, it was about to take a remarkable turn. Standing at this crossroads, Jenna's courage shone through the shadow of despair, setting the stage for the unexpected ripple her words would soon create. The office was about to feel the impact of a voice no longer willing to be ignored. For anyone struggling similarly, know this: your voice, when spoken with quiet strength, can be the breakthrough you need, even when the whole world doubts you. After that day, everything seemed to close in around Maya like a tightening noose. The final straw at the company holiday party wasn't just a moment of humiliation. It was a public spectacle that felt like the cruel spotlight of an unforgiving stage. She found herself retreating more and more, silent in meetings where her ideas once sparked brief curiosity. She walked the hallways with her head down, the whispers growing louder in her mind than in the actual office. But despite the engulfing weight, a sliver of something soft and persistent stirred inside her. One gray afternoon, when the chill in the air matched the cold she felt in her heart, Maya stumbled upon an old journal she hadn't touched in years, buried under a pile of books in her apartment. The pages were yellowed and faded, but held traces of the confident girl she'd once been, a girl who dreamed of making a difference, who believed in herself even when no one else did. She traced the ink with her fingers, words about courage, kindness, and the promise to never let anyone else define her worth. That gentle reminder awakened a flicker of hope. She realized that although the world around her had tried to dim her light, it could never erase the light she carried within. But how to kindle that light when darkness seemed so overwhelming? One morning, after another sleepless night tangled with self-doubt and fear, Maya took a step she'd avoided before. She reached out, not to the people who humiliated her, for she knew they held little interest in redemption, but to an unexpected ally, Jenna, a quiet colleague who'd always kept her distance, but lent a sympathetic smile when no one was watching. To Maya's surprise, Jenna responded with not just kindness, but wisdom drawn from her own past struggles. She confessed her own battles with insecurity and rejection, and suggested Maya join a small support group she attended outside of work, a circle of women who found strength in sharing stories of pain and resilience. Pushing past the trepidation that had become her constant companion, Maya agreed. The group met in a cozy community center, with soft lighting and worn couches that invited openness. The first session felt like stepping into another world, vibrant with shared vulnerability and unspoken understanding. Maya listened as others told stories of their own falls and rises, each narrative weaving into a tapestry of collective healing. Here, Maya discovered something profound. She was not alone. Her shame wasn't a solitary burden, but a thread in a much larger pattern of human experience. The group's gentle encouragement sparked new courage, not a flashy bravado, but a quiet, steady resolve to reclaim herself. For the first time in months, Maya felt a faint pulse of possibility. At work, things didn't change overnight. The whispers and cold shoulders persisted, and the fear of further embarrassment lingered like a shadow. But Maya's inner world was shifting. She was learning to look at herself, not through others' harsh judgments, but through the lens of self-compassion. This didn't erase the fear, but it began to warm the cold edges of despair. One afternoon, as Maya sat by a window, watching rain trace uneven paths down the glass, she reflected on the journey so far. It was still early, but the path forward was becoming clearer. She wasn't ready to confront those who had humiliated her just yet, but she was preparing, in silence and strength, for the moment she could stand tall again. Sometimes, she thought, the darkest moments are merely the soil from which new roots grow. If you've ever faced moments where the world seemed to break you, hold on to that fragile hope. Healing often arrives quietly, disguised as a kind word, a shared story, or a small step toward kindness to yourself. Keep moving forward, even when the path feels invisible. The turning point came unexpectedly. It was during one of those seemingly endless Monday morning meetings, where Maya sat quietly, bracing herself for another wave of dismissal or ridicule. Her heart pounded with the familiar mixture of dread and determination, hoping only to survive the encounter. But as the team leader called for updates, the atmosphere shifted when a vibrant new voice interjected. A client, Mr. Patel, who had joined the call to discuss a fresh project. Patel was direct, respectful, and his attention was sharp. When the conversation turned toward strategy, he asked for insights and data that only Maya had meticulously prepared days before, yet which her managers had consistently overlooked. Surprised but steady, Maya spoke clearly, her voice carrying the expertise and confidence she had been cultivating in the quiet corners of her mind. She outlined potential solutions with clarity and precision, her suggestions meeting every question with thoughtful answers. Suddenly, Maya's screen lit up with nods and quick messages of approval from the client's side. The team leader, caught off guard, attempted to regain control, but found his remarks overshadowed by the undeniable value of Maya's contributions. For once, the people who had undermined her were silent, their usual smug smirks replaced by uneasy glances. When the meeting ended, Mr. Patel privately emailed Maya, praising her professionalism and offering to connect her directly to his network for future projects. This unsolicited recognition felt like a balm to months of woundings, a tangible acknowledgement from someone outside the toxic dynamics of her workplace. Word started to spread. Colleagues who had ignored her began nodding in passing with new respect, while others who had mocked her grew quieter, as if sensing the changing tide. But the true shock came when the company's director called her into his office. Maya entered tentatively, expecting reprimand or worse. Instead, the director spoke of the client's feedback and the unexpected value Maya had brought to the project. He confessed surprise, but praised her tenacity and expertise. "We've underestimated your contributions," he admitted, "and I want to correct that moving forward." It was not an apology, and it was hardly perfection. But it was a start, a crack in an otherwise cold wall. For the first time in months, Maya heard acknowledgement without condescension. In those words lay the subtle invitation to rebuild her place with dignity. But the true transformation was not just about external changes. Maya recognized the strength she had forged through enduring shame and rejection. The support group, her inner reflections, and the quiet moments of self-kindness had shaped an unshakable core. The antagonists, her former tormentors, now hesitated before speaking ill or dismissing her ideas. Their arrogance dulled by the shift in power, which no longer lay solely in titles or loud voices, but in proven excellence and quiet resilience. Maya's smile that day was small but genuine, carrying the light of someone who had reclaimed herself from the wreckage of humiliation. The meeting had been a battlefield, but she had emerged victorious, not through confrontation, but by simply showing up with her authentic self. If you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or crushed beneath unfair judgment, remember that recognition may come from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes the most profound victories are those we forge quietly within ourselves. Holding on to hope can reveal allies in unlikely places and open doors you thought forever closed. In moments of darkness, never underestimate the power of your voice and the unseen courage waiting to rise. When you feel ready, share your story. It might just be the light someone else needs to see today. Following that pivotal meeting with the director, Maya's world began shifting in ways she never imagined. The change wasn't swift or spotless. It unfolded slowly, like the first hints of dawn after a long night. But each day brought renewed determination to reclaim her dignity and assert her rightful place. One afternoon, as the team gathered for their weekly project review, Maya stood at the front of the room with notes in hand. There was a steady calmness in her posture that hadn't been there before. Her eyes scanned the faces in the audience, some still clouded with doubt, others cautiously curious. She took a deep breath and launched into her presentation. Her voice was clear, confident, precise. She laid out strategies that not only demonstrated her expertise, but also addressed previously overlooked challenges. The room, typically filled with restless shuffling and side conversations during her segments, sat attentive this time. Even the harshest critics in the room resisted interrupting. When the presentation ended, a brief silence hung heavy before the subtle shifting of approval began. Colleagues who once sneered now met her gaze with respect, some nodding affirmatively. Jenna, her ally, smiled warmly from the back. Maya felt a quiet surge of victory wash over her. But it wasn't just the acknowledgement from others that fueled her resolve. The true triumph lay in how she reclaimed her own sense of worth. No longer shackled by shame or silence, she began to speak up more often, sharing ideas and feedback openly. The more she asserted herself with calm assurance, the more the toxic atmosphere lost its hold. The director's support, although measured, created ripples of accountability among her peers. Some who had publicly humiliated her now found their own behaviors questioned by management. Their sneering faced consequences: detachment from projects, loss of influence, or whispered conversations about professionalism. One particular moment crystallized everything Maya had endured and overcome. During a company-wide meeting, the team leader who had orchestrated much of her humiliation attempted to belittle her contribution, veiled in condescension. This time, Maya didn't flinch. With a steady voice, she calmly presented evidence of her work's impact, supported by client feedback and data from her projects. The room fell quiet. Her calm assertiveness left no space for denial. The leader's gaze faltered, and his facade cracked under the weight of truth. A few colleagues glanced around, their expressions shifting from smugness to respect. Later that day, Maya received a message from Jenna. "You're proving that strength isn't loud, it's steady. Proud of you." Tears surfaced, not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen. Maya's journey wasn't about vengeance or loudly exposing those who had wronged her. It was about standing tall, rooted in self-respect and excellence. She had shown a profound truth: humility and strength can coexist, and kindness need not be a weakness. In that steady reclamation arose justice, not punishment, but acknowledgement that those who spread cruelty often crumble when faced with genuineness and persistence. Maya's triumphant reclaiming of her voice rippled beyond her own story, inspiring colleagues who faced silent struggles, reminding them that dignity can be restored, even after the deepest wounds. If you've ever doubted your worth or felt crushed by unfair judgment, remember Maya's story. Reclaiming your voice can transform shadows into light and silence into strength. You have the power to rise, slowly and surely. When you find your footing, reach out. It's in connection that many paths to healing begin. The turning point came unexpectedly. It was during one of those seemingly endless Monday morning meetings where Maya sat quietly, bracing herself for another wave of dismissal or ridicule. Her heart pounded with the familiar mixture of dread and determination, hoping only to survive the encounter. But as the team leader called for updates, the atmosphere shifted when a vibrant new voice interjected. A client, Mr. Patel, who had joined the call to discuss a fresh project. Patel was direct, respectful, and his attention was sharp. When the conversation turned toward strategy, he asked for insights and data that only Maya had meticulously prepared days before, yet which her managers had consistently overlooked. Surprised but steady, Maya spoke clearly, her voice carrying the expertise and confidence she had been cultivating in the quiet corners of her mind. She outlined potential solutions with clarity and precision, her suggestions meeting every question with thoughtful answers. Suddenly, Maya's screen lit up with nods and quick messages of approval from the client's side. The team leader, caught off guard, attempted to regain control, but found his remarks overshadowed by the undeniable value of Maya's contributions. For once, the people who had undermined her were silent, their usual smug smirks replaced by uneasy glances. When the meeting ended, Mr. Patel privately emailed Maya, praising her professionalism and offering to connect her directly to his network for future projects. This unsolicited recognition felt like a balm to months of woundings, a tangible acknowledgement from someone outside the toxic dynamics of her workplace. Word started to spread. Colleagues who had ignored her began nodding in passing with new respect, while others who had mocked her grew quieter, as if sensing the changing tide. But the true shock came when the company's director called her into his office. Maya entered tentatively, expecting reprimand or worse. Instead, the director spoke of the client's feedback and the unexpected value Maya had brought to the project. He confessed surprise, but praised her tenacity and expertise. "We've underestimated your contributions," he admitted, "and I want to correct that moving forward." It was not an apology, and it was hardly perfection. But it was a start, a crack in an otherwise cold wall. For the first time in months, Maya heard acknowledgement without condescension. In those words lay the subtle invitation to rebuild her place with dignity. But the true transformation was not just about external changes. Maya recognized the strength she had forged through enduring shame and rejection. The support group, her inner reflections, and the quiet moments of self-kindness had shaped an unshakable core. The antagonists, her former tormentors, now hesitated before speaking ill or dismissing her ideas. Their arrogance dulled by the shift in power, which no longer lay solely in titles or loud voices, but in proven excellence and quiet resilience. Maya's smile that day was small but genuine, carrying the light of someone who had reclaimed herself from the wreckage of humiliation. The meeting had been a battlefield, but she had emerged victorious, not through confrontation, but by simply showing up with her authentic self. If you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or crushed beneath unfair judgment, remember that recognition may come from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes the most profound victories are those we forge quietly within ourselves. Holding on to hope can reveal allies in unlikely places and open doors you thought forever closed. In moments of darkness, never underestimate the power of your voice and the unseen courage waiting to rise. When you feel ready, share your story. It might just be the light someone else needs to see today.